Good morning. I'd like to welcome you back to our third Anchored in the Word morning reflection. And this morning we are looking at Psalm 40 again. And the topic that we're addressing is how God takes suffering and he uses it to shape us into spiritually matured individuals. And so let's all take our Bibles together, turn to Psalm 40, and we'll read the text together. We're not reading the entire Psalm this morning as we've been doing throughout the week, but we're going to take some thoughts out of this text. Here's what it says. I waited patiently for the Lord, and he inclined unto me and heard my cry. He brought me up also out of an horrible pit, out of the miry clay, and set my feet upon a rock, and established my goings. And he hath put a new song in my mouth, even praise unto our God. Many shall see it, and fear, and shall trust in the Lord. Blessed is that man that maketh the Lord his trust, and respecteth not the proud, nor such as turn aside to lies. Many, O Lord my God, are thy wonderful works which thou hast done, and thy thoughts which are to usward. They cannot be reckoned up in order unto thee. If I would declare them and speak of them, they are more than can be numbered. This morning, what we're doing is we're looking at how God uses suffering to drive us to a deeper sense of dependence upon him. And as we read in the 40th Psalm, what we see is several examples of how God does this. And the statement, he brought me up, is the focus of what God did in this man's life. And there are 5 things that I want to draw your attention to under that little statement, he brought me up. The first is this. David's circumstances leading up to this event were absolutely horrible. He felt hopeless. He felt demoralized. And in verse 2, he says that he brought me out of an horrible pit, out of the miry clay. I get in my mind this picture of a well where someone has been thrown into the well. We think of the story of Joseph and how his brothers threw him into a dry well. And there he is laying in the mud at the bottom of this pit. And he just hears his brothers talking about him, deciding what they're going to do with him. Are they going to kill him? Are they going to leave him for dead? Are they going to sell him? And that was what David was experiencing, that kind of a situation, similar to what Joseph was experiencing, a description of this demoralizing, hopeless situation. But what we see also in verse number 2 is that God graciously delivers him. And he took this situation that was so difficult and he gave him stability. And so it says it this way, he set my feet on a rock. It's like God reached down into that pit where David was, metaphorically speaking, and he lifted him up and he set him in this safe location, a place that was stable, a place where he was able to be safe. We also see under this statement a third thing. He used the trying circumstance to open David's eyes to the reality of God's presence and care. Now, in verse 2, when it says that he established my goings, David is not suggesting that before God was not actively at work in his life, and now God is actively at work in his life, is that David now is able to see what God is actually doing. And so it's through the difficult circumstances that God drives David to a dependence on him. And through those difficult circumstances, as God rescues him and delivers him, he's able to see the hand of God at work in his life. In other words, he is able to actually perceive what has always been the case. And so very, very important. Fourthly, he restored his joy. I really love this statement in verse 3. He says, he put a new song in my mouth, even praise unto our God. I mean, think about some of the darkest moments that people can encounter. What is something that they can't seem to do? And that is sing. They can't express joy in song because of how low their heart feels. And so David is celebrating the fact that God took him out of this terrible situation, and he not only established him and gave him the ability to see that he was at work again and gave him a stability, but God put joy in his heart, and he had the desire to sing again. And this stunning reversal of circumstances and perspective is something that God used to draw people to himself through David's experience. And so in verse 3, he says, many will see it and fear and trust in the Lord. Well, the point that I'd like to draw your attention to this morning is that in the same way that God worked in David's life, he works in our lives. In the same way that David found himself in very difficult circumstances, like he was in a pit, metaphorically speaking, he felt demoralized and hopeless. Well, God allows us to encounter situations where we will find ourselves in similar places. And just like God reached down and lifted David up and put his feet on a rock, God does the same in our lives. And just like God restored the joy of this man, David, God can restore the joy and the ability to sing again to us. And just like God took him and showed him that, in fact, he was actively at work in his life, and he gave him the ability to be able to see his hands at work, God does the same in our lives. To put it very simply, he never leaves us to ourselves. He doesn't leave us. He doesn't forsake us. He comes to us persistently, lovingly, and he reaches into our lives and puts us back where we need to be. And we see that he uses everything to accomplish his good purposes in our lives. If you are a believer, I have good news for you this morning. God uses all things to work together for good to accomplish his purpose of conforming us to the image of his Son. So that leaves us with a final question. What do we take away from this today? Well, what we take away from this is comfort and hope and encouragement. No matter what circumstances you find yourself in, God is able to do what he did in David's life in your life. And no matter what circumstances we may find ourselves in, God is working whether we can see it or not. In the same way that he restored David's joy, he can restore our joy. And so we've got to learn to trust him. And so that's my encouragement to you this morning. Let's trust the Lord and wait patiently for him. Have a blessed rest of your morning. And Lord willing, we will meet again tomorrow. Talk to you later. Bye now.